All right, Ben, I want to talk about our program structure here at Sylvia Brafman. There's a lot of avenues that we could go down here. Really, we could break down different modalities, different types of groups, but I actually want to zoom out a little bit and go very high level and just speak to the framework through which we structure our program. So, three things come to mind. Number one is the 5 lanes approach that we take. Number two is the emphasis on the family component to treatment. And number three is our view on addiction and treating that through the lens of primary mental health or dual diagnosis. So, starting with 5 lanes, I do remember that when we got together and I tried to kind of take the clinical genius from your brain and put it on paper and make it
You do
practical.
a good job of that, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard. What I gathered and what aligned with my own experience was the need to take a very broad approach to treating mental illness because of the fact that different things, different modalities, different approaches resonate with different types of people. And so specifically, we like to essentially throw everything at the wall and see what sticks.
Yep.
And when I say everything at the wall, I really mean the 5 lanes or the 5 buckets that we approach mental illness with. So number 1, clinical. Number 2, psychiatric. Number 3, medical. 4, spiritual. And 5, vocational. Now, I'm sure that there are others that, we could sort of break those down into, sort of sub lanes or niches within those lanes. But at a high level, we want to just go very broad up front. And if we fail in any one of those areas, we want to fail fast. We want to rule something out as something that is not necessarily moving the needle with somebody getting better, and go hard and sort of overweight those lanes that is really making a huge difference. And so from a practical standpoint, that inspired my recovery in that, for me, I would say spirituality solved 80% of my problems. I would say that clinical maybe solved 10%, and then maybe medical 5%. So for somebody else, maybe that's not the breakdown.
Right.
Maybe it's
Percentages are different.
right.
Yeah.
Like I think of a lot of thought disorders, right? Medication often moves the needle 50% or more if we're going to quantify it. For someone else, it might be 20, 20, 20, 20, 20. For another person, it might be 50, 10, 20, 10, 10.
Yep.
And so that really drives the practical explanation of what we're doing here. Why is that important from your clinical vantage point?
So that's important because if you look at those 5 lanes, and you're right, we could add lanes, we can take away, it's really just a thesaurus of words. They all mean the same. But if you take the 5, if you're not functioning in at least 2 of the 5, you're in trouble. You're in trouble with your mental illness. You're in trouble with stress. You're going to be in trouble with your life in general and your lifestyle. And so it's important for us to look at all of it and see where your deficits are, and then also how you learn. How do you learn things? What's your language? What works for you? What's happening in your life where you can start to thrive? We don't want to be gloom and doom. We want to be upbeat and optimistic. And so those 5 lanes are critical to engaging a patient and their family and leading to success.
Yeah, and I think too the question often is, what is the source of the mental illness? Meaning, is it purely a chemical? And obviously these things, there's an interplay between nurture and nature, right?
Sure,
But
sure.
is the source a view on the world that might be informed by how one's upbringing or trauma, or is it a chemical imbalance, or is it something else, right? And so I think these different lanes lend themselves to be more compatible with certain types of illnesses.
Absolutely. And what we do, and what I do with the psychiatric and medical team, is we triage this.
Yeah.
And we come up with what do we need to deal with first. And sometimes that's not in line with the family. The family has been stressed out and they're dealing with so much stuff, and they think it's something else. And by explaining this to them and explaining that we do triage it, we look at it, we're going to address everything, but there's a method to it. It's not just making it up as we go along. It's not just whatever the patient is complaining about or the family's complaining about. We actually look at it and strategize the best way to go to get a person to thrive again and to be alive again.
Yeah, and that's why from a practical standpoint, looking at like what is treatment, if I had to like really sum it up, and you might disagree with me on this, but I don't think you will, it's stabilization first, and then game planning for what is the optimal wellness package moving out of treatment,
Yeah.
right? What is the percentage mix of these different things that will ultimately be part of somebody's wellness package? I've refined my personal wellness package over time. The gym is part of that. Meditation is part of
That's
that.
right.
Medication is a very small part of that. Spirituality, right? And so over many years, I know what I need.
And what you're talking about, and I agree with you, but what you're talking about is managing your symptoms. If you can manage your symptoms, you manage your life. If you don't, it manages you. And you end up in treatment, jail, hospitals,
Yep.
or worse.
Yeah. So I don't want to go too deep into the other two because, we have so many videos and podcasts on these topics. But to the family component,
Sure.
we say it's a non-negotiable here at Sylvia Brafman. We almost view the family as being in a virtual wing of
Yep.
the center.
Yes.
It's sort of embedded in everything that we do, very high level of interaction with families. Why is that a critical component of your overall clinical program?
Because everybody has a story, and it tells a story, and families have a perspective. Doesn't matter about right and wrong. They have a perception of things. They have a stake in it. Everyone comes from a family, so I want to know the whole story. I don't want to read this novel and there's chapters missing. I want to get all the information so that I can help the patient succeed.
And then number 3, there is a drug rehab on every corner, especially in South Florida.
Yeah.
My plight is definitely aligned with the addict's journey, and I know that you actually had owned a drug rehab at one point, but
Yeah.
we made a very deliberate decision
We did.
to go primary mental health, and there's a major need for it. Frankly, a lot of folks say that they're primary mental health, but they're really not. They're really set up more to be a drug rehab. And so your view on if we have somebody come in who does have a drug problem, who might be considered dual diagnosis, you want to treat primary mental health symptoms first and foremost. That's not to say that all of the things that drug rehabs do and that worked for me like tremendously, which is a spiritual 12-step approach, needs to be cast to the side, but rather it should be, if somebody is here, implemented in parallel with the primary mental health stuff that we do here. So I just want to get your view on why that's part of our overall program structure.
Because if you're dealing with any type of substance use, abuse, dependency, and addiction, you're dealing with a schism of mental health, in other words, mental illness. Call it depression, call it anxiety, what have you. When we're talking about substance abuse, use, and dependency and addiction, we're really honing in on obsessive compulsive disorder and anxiety. And so by treating the anxiety and the OCD and all the symptomatology with that, we are in essence treating the addiction. And then I don't want to forget this, is that if it gets to a point where someone is actually the real deal addict, there's trauma in their life, some kind of trauma. And so to reframe that is critical to a person's success, for them to accept their situation so that they don't keep repeating the same mistakes and end up using as a way to try to self-soothe. Then we've done our job. We've been able to do that. But that's where that comes from.
And I think we do a really good job of differentiating, as you put it, the real deal chronic alcoholic from somebody that uses, maybe I call them a hard user or a hard drinker, to mitigate their mental health symptoms. But if they absolutely have to stop, they can. So they might not need what a true addict needs, but they would be better off clean and sober, and it's actually a necessity for them to move forward in some of these other lanes that we talked about.
Certainly.
Thank you.